Good evening to everybody. My colleague Daniele brought you to the South America. I brought you to another field of study. I brought you to the Middle East, most precisely in Jordan, in Zaatari, that is a refugee camp nearby the border of Syria, to present you a work that I've made with my colleagues Salvatore Pappalardo and Massimo De Marchi, and I'll show you how we have created this OpenGIS-based workflow in order to mapping the refugee camps. And also, I would like to give you in this presentation a broader view on the use of GIS to analyze and understanding issues concerning the refugee camps, the climate refugees, and on the other hand, the climate justice. Let's start with a question. Why talk about climate refugees? Migration phenomenon is what we face in our everyday life, is what we can read every day in the journal, in the on the news, etc. So it's something that we have lived and something that have reverberated during our everyday life in the recent years. But today we have to talk about climate refugees because they are the results of a worldwide changing scenario where the climate crisis reshaped the migration phenomenon. In this sense, I would like to give you introducing a small framework inside where we are going to move in order to understand how this framework is going to clusterize inside our case of study, inside the surface that we are going to analyze with GIS. The consequence of the climate crisis is the increasing, I give you some examples, the increasing of desertification in extreme weather events, the crop yield reduction, the increase of conflicts, also the migration and the forced displacement. All these things that I explain now are clusterized, are happening in Syria. That is the field that we are going to analyze. Also, it brings to us the concept of climate justice, where everybody we have to face with the climate change, have to face with issue regarding climate change, and mostly on people that are forced to go away from their country and find shelter and find hospitality in other places. So let's give, and it's important to us, let's give a special perspective on the two topics that we are going to discuss in this presentation, the climate refugees and the refugees camps, because we have a climate changing scenario on the top that have seen only in 2021, 17.2 million people that were forced to flee due to the displacement of the ecosystem and the impacts of the climate change on their territory. And the consequence of this climate change scenario and of this forced displacement is that they find a shelter in different formal and informal refugee camps around the globe. So let's think that before starting our work, we have say, okay, we can analyze through GIS an issue regarding, in the sense, refugees and refugee camp. But we have to understand that the space that we are going to analyze is a space where the cluster or this issue that could be overlap, could be analyzed through GIS in a certain sense. So we give us this challenge before starting to work. And the challenge was to respond to the urgent need to map and monitor these emerging refugee cities. Because if you see later, Zaatari is not just a refugee camp, are bigger surfaces where are stacked all these people. So in order to support, the challenge was in order to support the human rights policies on the field and give evidence of this phenomenon. So is a wider approach than a mere data analysis on the field. And that's the framework that I would like to give you to understand why we have focusing on Zaatari and why we have focusing GIS and analytic approach to this most multidisciplinary field. So if you see this map from the UN that placed the refugee camps around the globe, and you see there are really a lot. So to respond to our challenge in in summary, was to using GIS for monitoring the refugee camps. We are going to, we have think about using GIS for produce special information for who operates in the field, not a mere data analysis, but thinking about, okay, the data that we are going to develop could be used for who operates in the field. And because on the other hand, we are going to focus on one of the most valuable characteristics of GIS data, its dynamism. With its dynamism, I think that it's important to understand that the GIS data could be compared, overlapped with other data, so could be used in a broader way than just the aerial data of a certain surface. And also this vision from above consent for in our framework an independent eye on the situation that it's not really common in the field of study that we are going to work. So let's talk about Zaatari. Zaatari was our case of study, and is a refugee camp that is located nearby, circa 40 kilometers from the border of Syria. It's placed in Jordan, sure. And today it represents one of the largest refugee camps, both in terms of size and number of people hosted, circa 80,000 nowadays. The first time that I approached to Zaatari, for give you an example, I live in a small town nearby, in a city nearby Florence, and have less people than Zaatari. So we can truly say that Zaatari is an emerging refugee city in a certain sense. As you see in the slide before, it's really a big surface where all these people are stuck. So, but for understanding why we have chosen Zaatari, in the sense that the topic of this presentation and also of this panel is the climate refugees and the climate justice, because under a mix of social and environmental factors such as climate change, war, and sustainable farming practices and water management, Syrian refugees have constantly moved to the camp in recent years. If you read the story of these people, mostly people that are moving to Zaatari in the last 2 or 3 years, after 10 years of Syrian civil war, was they always say that maybe they are farmers and they have a real big change in their environments due to the war and due to the increasing desertification. So if we take the climate change issue and we compare to the Zaatari, if you see in this map, the small circle that I brought to you here, we see in the map that the vulnerability of Syria and the region of Iraq, Syria, etc., are one of the regions that are most affected by the climate change. I can give you the example of the Iraq that in the last month they have a lot of desert storms and sandstorm that afflicted the country. And the phenomenon of desertification also have afflicted Syria, and it's one of the reasons why many people are moved to Zaatari in recent years. So let's focusing on our work. So we decided to try to monitoring the Zaatari development using Sentinel data, more precisely Sentinel-2 data, creating a pipeline inside this an IDA was called Spider in order to follow some objectives or goals. So the first one was to use the free and open source data. Sentinel brought us the possibility to do that, and also with implementation of the Sentinel API to create a pipeline that operates by their own. The use of the latest geospatial libraries, for example, Folium, Shipley, if you see here, Fiona in the image, GeoPandas, etc., and the oldest ones such as GDAL, Rasterio, and the others. And the objective was trying to monitoring, but tracking with a few days away. For example, in where there is good weather, maybe in summer, we can tracking. We have records from Zaatari every 5-6 days, so we have reached this objective in a certain sense. The result, as you see here, is the creation of a database who described the area in square kilometers of Zaatari. It's made by 81 multi-polygons. I've called it multi-polygons because every record is a sum of polygons of shelters that was detected by the algorithm, by the flow on the ground. And it covers a period between January 2016 and October 21. It's a real fast workflow that use only open source libraries, as I said before. And this creation of this huge data set, as you see in the rendering here, permits to analyze and giving a visual example on how that area has grown during the last year. I'm sorry, because that area have a lot of structures, so I think it's difficult to understand they're grown over time. But if you see from 2016 and 2021, the density of some shelters in certain area are placed in one side and then in the other, because you have to understand that and that was one of the challenges that we are facing. Refugee camps are a sort of mutable entities. And so we have to understand that when a shelter was not used, maybe 2 minutes later they were removed. So as you see in this graphical representation of the Zaatari time lapse, the aerial time lapse of Zaatari, they change a lot during the time. In giving useful and special information on the field, I would like to focus on this graph. It's just a simple representation on the area that was calculated by the workflow and the population compared to the data of the population of Zaatari. In this sense, we can do a lot with this data, with this special data of the GIS, because if you see that in many times the population are grown and the area in square kilometers of the field of the refugee camps don't follow this growth of population, okay, causing great density of population in center entire of the camp. So is an issue that regarding also the good living of the refugees who are stuck there. So if we can make a small discussion.
3 minutes left, sorry.
Okay, and if we can open a small discussion, maybe we can discuss about it later. For us nowadays, automation and its exponential growth in terms of libraries represent a game changer in GIS. The way that we have developed this flow, this workflow, the way that this workflow analyze and produce useful data in a small time, and you know that the satellite images are big and are maybe hard to processing in a certain way. Is just something that we recognize that these libraries are game changers in the field of GIS. Also, we propose an application of this frontier in GIS to highlight the issue concerning refugees, because as we live in the age of the data-driven decision, and we have seen last year with the COVID pandemic, we argue that the results of this data manipulation could be developed a data-driven flow for calibrated future decisions. So this data, this open data, could be used for who operates in the field in order to understand better the issue regarding these camps and taking better decision. In conclusion, refugee camps should be viewed as newborn cities, malleable to sustainable developments, to follow the UN care guidelines and give refugees a good living standard. For us, GIS emerges as a suitable technologies for reach this goal. Thank you, everybody.